Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Daniel Salter, the Chief Equity Strategist at Renaissance Capital, and one of the best parts of my job is when I get to sit down with business leaders, innovators, and disruptors. Ivan Tavrin is certainly all three of those, and I think we can safely add media mogul on top of that, something I hope he won't object to. So by way of brief introduction, Ivan is the founder of Media One, one of Russia's largest independent media groups, which includes Muz TV, Russia's equivalent of MTV, as well as the Disney Channel. Media One also controls Russia's leading radio network and Russia's largest digital billboards operator. Ivan also controls a company called Vertical, which is one of Russia's leading independent telecom towers operators. He was CEO of Megafon from 2012 until 2016, where he brought one of Russia's leading mobile operators to the market. And if that isn't enough, his investment company, Kismet Capital, has listed 3 SPACs on NASDAQ, raising between them $700 million, the first of which has successfully closed a merger with the game developer Nextus. Ivan, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Daniel, good morning, and thank you very much for having me. Thanks a lot.
Good to have you here. Now, before we dive into some of your latest ventures, maybe you could give us 2 minutes on who is Ivan Tavrin. How did you get into the media business initially? And what drives you? Is it about communication, new technologies, deal making, the money-making opportunity? What drives you?
Look, I think the reason why I'm in media, I would say, is because of 2 people. One of them is my father, who told me right in the beginning of the 90s when I just entered the university, is that being and working in advertising is something which will be interesting for me years and years going forward. He just thought that I will start working in advertising when I will graduate from the university, but I started doing it on the first week when I just started being in the university. And the second person is my partner in media between 2000 and 2008, Tim McDonald, a US veteran whom we built together TV3, which is one of the largest television stations, television networks, which we put together during many years in 2000s and finally sold it. Actually, RANCAP was our banker in the end of 2006 to Prof Media for more than $500 million. So this is 2 reasons why I'm in media, 2 personal why. And I would say that definitely media was the only part of my business story and the most active part of my business story in 2000s and in the end of 90s. While starting from my Megaphone days, I'm not really too much involved in it, but it's still a very important part of our Kismet ownership operations and a great asset to own.
Great. Well, we'll certainly get to the 2020s shortly. But in general, you've got businesses at various stages of maturity right now. You've got media assets in TV, radio, and advertising, the largest independent media portfolio in Russia. You've got Vertical, Russia's largest telecom tower business. And then you've got private equity and SPACs within Kismet Capital, which I guess is where a lot of the future growth is likely to be. I mean, how do you look at that mix, the portfolio you have? Are you trying to balance between future growth businesses and cash generation? Do you look to exit the maturer businesses over time? How do you see the mix changing?
Look, the reason when we founded Kismet in 2016, we basically started with our media businesses. So we own 3 television networks, including our joint venture with Disney, Muz TV, and You, which is a reality channel. We owned our radio business. And first, we just wanted to diversify out of media and start to look at something new. So we started to look at the assets in Russia, which we can buy, operate, control, change them for good and implement our strategy. But also we wanted to look internationally. So internationally, we started to invest into growth companies. We started to invest in funds. We became LPs of great funds, like some of them are US funds or European funds. And we started to be an active investor in in emerging growth companies out of Europe, Russia, etc. So this is how we ended up to own a share and stake in the companies like Ozon, Headhunter, Auto One from Germany. All of them became public at a later stage. We started to be an LP in General Atlantic, some of the Carlyle funds, some of the smaller or larger private equity shops. And this was a new strategy to start with. But in Russia, since then, we added two business verticals to us. One is a tower, as you mentioned, and the second one is digital outdoor advertising. These are the businesses which we actively manage and which we actively own and operate.
Okay, so if we start off with the history, I guess, media. So Media One, the only sizable private media company in Russia. I mean, in theory, that should be quite a big advantage. I'm sure it gives you some additional flexibility and maybe some complexities. Maybe it's slightly harder to exit in media in Russia. What do you find the key specifics are of the Russian media market nowadays?
Look, I think that as in many other countries, media, especially media which is involved with news, with any political agenda, etc., sometimes it becomes not a business. However, for us, we have zero political agenda. We don't have news in any other of our businesses. We don't have anything which is connected with non-entertainment. We just do cartoons, music, shows. We do many programs in reality, so we don't really involved in any politics in one or the other shape or form. However, the media landscape all over the world is changing. So we think that all of our assets should have a strategy, and they have a strategy, how to go from yesterday, where the only revenue was advertising, to tomorrow, where you have direct-to-consumer revenue, where you have a digital component. And this is why when we bought a company, Gallery, which is the out-of-home advertising business, we implemented the strategy to digitize it. This is why our Moose TV has a strategy to work more not in advertising, but mostly in digital, to produce content for internet, to produce shows, to manage artists, to be an active player in this part of business. So I think media business in Russia, if you're not connected to news and politics, is not really different from media business in UK, US, China, or any other part of the world.
I think media which makes you happy is perhaps an easier sector to be in than media which makes you unhappy, being the news.
That's true. That's true. This is why we try to have a positive agenda, only entertainment.
Which is what we all need, certainly. So if we move forward to towers now, Russia's tower infrastructure is actually still quite dominated by the major telecom operators. 5G is on its way, which I think will need more towers closer together. How much of an opportunity do you see there for vertical? And do you think that's going to be something kind of incremental, that the market share of the independent tower operators will increase, or something a bit more seismic in that we could see entire infrastructure portfolios being offloaded over time?
Look, I think, speaking of the differences in strategy between Russia and other parts of the world, I don't think tower business will be different. It will be the same as in US, in Europe, or in other countries, including China, Latin America, or Southeast Asia. Operators don't really need to own their towers because their passive infrastructure is not a competitive advantage anymore. It's just a big part of assets on the balance sheet, which can generate some cash, but they can only generate cash in independent format. This is why the companies like American Towers, Cellnex, and others were created all around the world. And now these are companies which are worth tens and tens of billions of dollars. This is basically when telco operators, they offload their portfolios of towers, and they get this money to invest into their core business, to compete for client, to compete for a customer, to invest into this relationship. And in Russia, there are only 3 independent tower companies. and all of the portfolios are still owned by 4 major operators. So I think that there will be a consolidation, definitely. And when we started to think of it 5 years ago, or even more, when I was at Megaphone, we started to think that the time of putting those businesses together and merging some of the tower portfolios as well as independent tower companies will come. And this is why we were thinking also of raising a SPAC back then to put together some of those ideas. It definitely takes us and took us much more time, and the market hasn't started this consolidation, but I'm absolutely sure that this is something inevitable. This is something very close. And I would say that 2021 will be a year when this process will start. Whether all of the portfolios will be offloaded this year or next year or not, yet to be seen, but I think the process is here.
Great. Now, you're founder and CEO of the Kismet Capital Group, where you're investing in new businesses and becoming much more global at the same time. Can you tell us a little bit more about where you're going with Kismet? Are the new business lines an incremental shift in strategy, or does it in part reflect the potential time frame of deal flow in your existing media and telecoms businesses in Russia? Do you aim at the end of it to become a truly global company in new technologies? Where are you heading with Kismet Capital?
Look, the idea is we started Kismet Capital as a family office where we started to invest, as I mentioned, just to diversify ourselves. But then we understood that there is much more happening in the tech space in Europe or in other parts of the world. Then we understood that Russians seem to have talent not only in tech, where they are best gamers, coders, and people who create amazing businesses in fintech, SaaS. Google is created by Russians to a certain extent. A lot of gaming companies, etc. So we understood that we should try ourselves in investing. And this is where we started to look at the businesses in Europe, where we opened an office in London. Now Kismet has 3 offices, which is Moscow, London, and Cyprus. We are thinking in opening one more hub in Dubai, which will look at that part of the region. But also, we think that digital investment became a truly business without borders, where investors from Russia can get access to companies from Africa. We have companies in our portfolio from Egypt, from United Kingdom, from Sweden, from France, from Italy, from Israel, from Russia, definitely. So it became a business without borders, and we hope that out of the family office, we started to create a really an investment platform, which is private today. Maybe it will be public one day. And basically the flywheel of our operations is investing as an LP into great funds, getting great deals for our SPACs in future or for our growth investment, private growth investment. Then we invest in private companies, where we also create an opportunity to de-SPAC them potentially later on in the stage of their lives. But also SPAC is an important part of the strategy of the firm, where we, as you mentioned, launched 3 of them during the last 12 months. We made the first one in August and second and third in February. We are planning to make more of them, not only in the US, but in Europe as well. And this is definitely a key part of our strategy.
So maybe looking a bit more at your SPAC venture, you launched 3 SPACs. How did that decision come around? And how do you see SPACs? Do you see them as kind of accelerating the path to market for new corporates? Or you see it as some kind of democratization of the financial markets for new companies? Or just a great business opportunity, or some kind of combination of all 3?
So look, I think it's a little bit of both. We started to look at the SPACs in 2016 and 2017 when one of our board members in Megaphone, our independent director, Lord Paul Miners, chaired several of them, both in US and in London. And we understood that it's an opportunity for a company which is not ready by itself, which doesn't have an investment team and the team who knows how to do it, which has a founder who is concentrated on a completely different thing, or which needs to offload a part of their business, is looking to merge with a public company and accelerate basically the process. So we've spent hundreds and hundreds of meetings all around the world with people who invest in SPACs, with people who knew us from my megaphone days, and we really talked a lot about it. And when you were mentioning, okay, Russia, SPAC, something else, it was a little bit too exotic for them, because people who did SPACs in US and UK were not really looking at Russia, and people who invested in Russia were not really looking at SPACs. Then in 2020, all of those things merged, and SPAC specialists started to do deals in all of the world. In US, there were like tsunami of deals, and we thought we should restart the process. We raised our first one completely by Zoom. We filed to SEC and were preparing our docs in the middle of pandemic, and then we raised it in summer. We did a roadshow in summer, and that was very good that years before we knew a lot of people whom we talked to. Now we see that SPACs are getting popular. Yeah, obviously they were extremely popular half a year ago or 3 months ago, and everybody was like looking at this. As people mentioned, some of my US friends said, I know more people who are doing SPACs than who have COVID. So everybody was thinking of it. Now it's all changing, and I think it's professionalizing to a certain extent and moving to a platform like Kismet. So we have about 30 people, out of whom today are 15 investment professionals. And if we are looking at a deal or a company to this SPAC, you have a partner who's leading the process, you have myself who is like really involved, you have a director, you have analysts, you have a lawyer, you have a financial people. So we are helping the company to prepare the accounts, to hire personnel, which is needed. I don't know, IR specialists, CFOs who are trained and used to run public companies. So if we know the process inside out, like we're doing today with Nextus, we started it in November when we signed LOI, and we are moving to closing next month. So we already filed everything to the SEC, and we've prepared the accounts of the company, etc. So we think that the platforms who know how to do it could be a really value-add partners. But also for us, if we do a SPAC deal, it's not just help the company to go public, get a promote, and run away. This is an opportunity to invest more capital, real capital. So we invest our own money into the business, into the deal. We will be locked up to a lot of time, and in a way we are only looking at the businesses which would be SPAC by Kismet as something which will have a long view to hold, long view to support the company at the board of directors, at the management level, and overall. So this is why we think it's a very interesting opportunity for us to go forward.
Great. So I think this feeds in a bit to the next question. I mean, we're 6 months into 2021. I think we've had 345 SPAC IPOs this year. It's slowed down a little bit in the last couple of months, but over 2/3 of all US IPOs this year have been SPACs, raising $100 billion, I think, and 300 more supposedly in the pipeline. I mean, I think you've partly addressed this by talking about how important the platform is in terms of the SPAC, but how saturated do you think the market is in the US versus Europe and versus emerging markets, and how do you fit into that?
Look, I think that in US, as you just mentioned, with 100 billion of dry powder and several hundreds of vehicles raised, that means that if you put an average life of the SPAC of 18 to 24 months, that means basically a SPAC will need to announce a deal every day or even more. I think that a lot of those companies will struggle to find great assets just because there are not that many companies to go on the market. However, I think that in our part of the world, which we call like EMEA, Europe, Middle East, to a certain extent Africa, and obviously emerging markets in Eastern Europe, Russia, ex-CIS, etc. We'll definitely have a lot of opportunities, just because we still need time to catch up in terms of building tech companies. I mean, within the last 12 months, we had a jumbo IPO out of Germany, out of one, where we were an investor. There were several jumbo deals out of UK, another part of Europe, but there were not tens of them. There's still a needle. We still need a lot of time to catch up, and we see it as an opportunity for ourselves. We are not looking at US deals. We are only looking at European deals, and this is why we have two hubs. One in Russia, one in London, where we are looking at companies and we are participating in the processes, which are from everywhere, from, I don't know, France, Denmark, Germany, Russia, etc. I think there's definitely a place for a player like us, especially with our own balance sheet, which can invest into those businesses.
And how about regulation of SPAC? So there's discussion that the SEC might make some proposals by April next year. Do you think the market itself could deal with any issues, in that the most successful platforms will gain a reputation and be the most successful at bringing SPACs to the market? Or do you think there's something that the regulator could do to help there?
Look, I think that SEC has put a lot of cold water on the SPAC market, which is the right thing to do. I mean, there were too many of them. It was too active. And people could start to lose a lot of money just because it's just became a scheme where more and more capital went to it. But also with the hike of key rate all over the world, definitely SPAC started to cool off a little bit. So I think that there will be less of them. However, people who will invest risk capital into them, and the sponsors will be more selective in the deals, and investors will be more selective in the sponsors. So I think it's a pretty healthy process going forward. And as you know, SEC started to treat warrants differently during last months. There could be some other changes, but SPAC is a product which existed for years and decades. And I'm not really sure that something will change. That was like a real boom in the last 12 months. Then it will be a little bit lower, but we definitely feel a lot of comfort that people who know what they will be doing, ready to invest in those companies and supporting them into the next chapter of their public life, can have a lot of success.
Good. So your first SPAC recently merged with the gaming company Nextus. Congratulations on that. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did you identify the company? How did you choose it? Was it the sector first, then the company, or you had a huge list from which to choose from? Was it tough to persuade the management team that they should list? Obviously, when you're a listed company, your requirements are a lot higher than they are when you're unlisted. Take us through that a bit.
Absolutely. Look, when we went to investors last August, and people asked us, where are you going to look? What are you going to invest in? What are the sectors you like? We were a little bit, now we are openly telling that we are looking at businesses in Europe as well as in Russia and former Soviet Union. But then we were a little bit more cautious and telling them, okay, we want to find a Russian company or a company with Russian roots, which is invented by Russians, which is playing in international arena, but also with an idea to put together more businesses, to use it as a platform to invest further, like we did in television, like we did in towers, like we are doing it in other businesses. So what could be better than consolidating gaming sector? What could be more interesting than putting together the businesses in the gaming sector? Because A, the market is definitely here. B, Russian founders created a truly global businesses. They created truly global stories. And they are not only working in the Russian market, they are working, I mean, Russian gaming companies founded by Russians are active in US, in Europe, in Latin America, in other parts. So then we met Andrei Fadeev, who is the CEO of Nextus, and Boris Gertsovsky. They are two co-founders who are supported by Dmitry and Igor Buchmans, the founders of Playrix, one of the most successful gaming companies in the world. And we met them. We started to look at what could be done together. And actually, we did a pretty fast deal. I mean, we met in September, we shook hands in November, we signed LOI in December, and we announced the deal on 1st of February. There were several months of work non-stop, our team, Nextus team, etc. But we are really happy that we can use it as a platform for consolidation. Once it will be public, we will have our stock as a currency to pay for other acquisitions. And there are several amazing examples in US like Zynga, or in Sweden like Embracer or Stillfront, where people built multi-billion-dollar businesses with actually very small games, where you can really add a lot into the platform. So this is our idea going forward. This is why we like gaming, and this is why we're very active in the sector.
Sounds very exciting. Now, looking forward, does gaming or Russia give us any clue to where SPACs 2 and 3 might end up? And why did you launch 2 simultaneously? Is it easier to launch 2 at once, or do you already have some targets in mind which gave you the confidence to launch 2 companies? And you mentioned more SPACs perhaps on the way one day. Any ideas when we could see SPACs 4 and 5?
Look, I think first of all, the reason why we mentioned 2nd and 3 it was because it was February. One of the hottest months in SPACs ever. So we decided to simultaneously launch 2nd and 3 in order we will be spending time on finding a great opportunity rather than on constant fundraising. And when we were raising 2nd and 3 for $450 million book for 2 of them, we had more than 6 billion of demand. So it was like a tech IPO with 15 times oversubscribed. We, as well as our advisors, were really surprised that the market puts a lot of belief into it. But again, it was not only a function of Kismet, but a function of the market back then. So we decided to raise 2 just to have them, to look at different stories, to have a bigger bandwidth. Obviously, we are not planning to de-SPAC another gaming company, because it can compete with Nextus, and we don't want to. We see Nextus as a very active part of our portfolio, where we will really spend a lot of time on working. I will be on the board of directors, and the team will help with everything, IR, M&A, financials, etc. So Kismet is very heavily involved. And we will be looking at the businesses both in Russia, and we are looking at the businesses both in Russia as well as internationally with 2 angles. First, tech. Second, roll-up strategy. We like where we can do roll-ups, and we like we can do tech.
Yeah, so Nextus is domiciled in Cyprus, but run by Russians. How important was that Cyprus domicile to you? Would you consider deals actually on the ground in Russia? Is that something you think your shareholders are ready for?
Oh, of course, of course. I think that Nextus was domiciled in Russia because, at the time when they moved there, and it happened years ago, it was easier for them to deal with App Store, to deal with other things, to collect cash for the games. And look, Hero Wars is one of the top grossing games in Europe. So they wanted to be in Europe. The founders wanted to be in Europe. They wanted to be considered as a European company. But Cyprus is a very convenient place for them, where on one hand, you don't lose connection with Russian tech community. There are like 10,000 coders and tech people based in Cyprus. But also, it was not far from home. I mean, just a 3-hour flight. And people speak a lot of Russian there. So there are a lot of gaming companies. And whether investors should look at something, but we will bring something domiciled in Russia, obviously, of course. I mean, we are constantly looking and evaluating opportunities of Russian businesses. I think the fact that only during last 12 to 24 months, there was an IPO for Zone, which is a super e-commerce company. There was an IPO in Headhunter, which is also an amazing business, shows that investors still have confidence in Russian consumers. We have about 150 million people. We have a pretty big economy. Yes, of course, there are some issues with sanctions, US-Russia relationship. Hopefully it will be better. But I think we need to look at it from the perspective that Russia will have great stories. Yes, of course, we are not really investing our own money into oil and gas or into something of that kind. But there will be a lot of businesses consumer-oriented, and that will be and still is a focus for Kismet. This is why the core part of our office is in Moscow, and this is why I hope that we'll bring great deals to the market.
Now, SPACs have traditionally been NASDAQ listed, given the very deep pool of capital there. Is NASDAQ still very much the venue of choice for listing? Are there any other jurisdictions starting to step up, or you hear anything in Russia or some of the European countries that they want to develop SPACs on the ground in those countries?
Yeah, obviously, I think that NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange are still the venues of choice for a lot of businesses. But Europe has started to play an active role as well. So Frankfurt did several vehicles, Amsterdam is active, and we've looked at Amsterdam as well. And we think that it all depends not really on the venue and the capital. Capital is flying both ways. It depends on where the business should be focused. So if you have peers in NASDAQ, that's an important factor. But also for technological businesses, probably NASDAQ is the best venue. Whether this business is from Russia, China, Germany, or whatever, investors in NASDAQ, they like tech companies and they are prepared to look at them, they're prepared to invest in them, and that's still an interesting choice. Russia might do a SPAC one day as well in the Moscow Stock Exchange. I mean, I heard that there were some discussions in the government to look at this vehicle for a faster IPO of the business.
Good. Now, stepping back a bit from SPACs, SPACs clearly typically target slightly larger companies, maybe at slightly later stage in their development, but you've also got a lot of experience in investing in smaller startups at an early stage, both in Russia and globally. Now, what do you think about the Russian venture capital market in general? Are there some parts of the ecosystem which are working well and some parts which are working less well? And where do you see as the most promising sectors or industries for those early stage investments over the short to medium term?
Look, first of all, I need to admit that Kismet investments in early stage companies, we did two, have completely failed. So we did one in 16, the other one is probably 18 or 19. They completely failed. It was not a success. But also when you look at venture, we looked at venture from the operator's perspective. Okay, we see the story, we buy it out, we fix it, etc. But if we fix the existing company with a lot of revenues, with a lot of time in the market, this is one thing. This is where we are good at. If you're doing something early stage, you need a founder. You need somebody who's super active. You need somebody who is super focused, laser focused on operations day to day. And that was our mistake. So I think the lessons learned. And I think that the venture type of investments in Russian companies would be a part of Kismet's strategy as well going forward. Not only because we think it's our, it's our desire and it's our, we need to support the young entrepreneurs just because we know how to invest companies and we know how business model works. But also I think because more and more Russians are building global businesses. There are businesses which are built in SaaS, which are really founded by Russians. There are businesses in fintech, in neo-banking, founded by Russians in Germany or in other parts of Europe. There are businesses in food delivery. The Samokat, which is a leading Russian food delivery platform, founders are moving and starting a business in New York. So there will be more and more businesses which would be founded by Russians, but aiming new territories. And I think that to invest in those businesses in a purely minority positions in a really venture style would be would be a part of strategy of Kismet going forward.
Ivan, this sounds all extremely exciting. We could talk for hours about it, but sadly, our time is up. It's been really a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much for all your insights and your time. We look forward to following all your ventures in the future. And I'd like to thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Daniel, thank you very much for your time. Wish you a great conference. 25 years is a lot. And it's very good to hear that the firms like Renaissance Capital are still here doing the deals, doing the conferences, but even in a new format. I remember I was at one of the conferences like 15 years ago. Like it was obviously live. Nobody thought of Zoom back then, but have a great day, have a great conference, and thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.